Hey, Allison, you seem to be conflating a number of issues here, and so I'd really like to help clarify for you. On my video where I said that I do not expect obedience out of my children, and I think that the evangelical concept of first-time obedience, expecting kids to unquestioningly submit and obey authority, is really toxic and harmful. Not only does it prime children for abuse from adults, not only does it get children to subjugate their own will, to ignore their own good judgment and their intuition in favor of blindly following whatever a grown-up tells them. I also think that through years of coercive control, indoctrinating children to submit to authority, to obey even when their conscience tells them not to, that you contribute to the creation of oppressive regimes like the one that we are living under now in the US. Kids who are raised to believe that anybody in authority over them was placed there by God and must be followed no matter what, and that to disobey is a sin, those children grow into adults that have been primed to follow a strongman, a dictator, and to carry out his horrific immoral plans because they've spent years conditioning their conscience to be quiet and to do what is demanded of them without thinking at all, to blindly follow authority. On that video, you left this comment, not sure how classroom teachers feel about having no authority with students taught not to believe there's any value in listening to adults. Kids are shortchanged by not listening to anyone but themselves. So nowhere in my video did I say that there is no value in children listening to adults. In fact, if you had listened to what I was saying, you would understand that I want kids to listen to adults, but I want adults to listen back. I want kids and adults to have conversations, for children to learn how to have critical thinking skills and how to negotiate with other people around them, whether they are other children or adults. And that I want children to listen to their own conscience, to develop and grow their morality as well as their critical thinking skills. Now, I used to teach science, and my husband is a public school special education teacher. And yet, we both raised our children not to believe in the concept of obedience, not to blindly submit to authority, not to abandon their own conscience, not to subjugate their own goodwill and common sense. And guess what? My two eldest kids are adults who have jobs. They are full-time college students. My 17-year-old started college at 15 and a half. And they all do just fine. They don't have any disciplinary issues in the classroom. They're also really good at advocating for themselves, talking to their professors. For example, my kid that's minoring in German, there are these timed quizzes for her German class, and she went to the professor and was like, I feel like 6 minutes is not long enough to listen to this audio file and record my response and upload it. If there's any lag in the audio file loading to play for me, I will run out of time. Would you be willing to add a couple more minutes to these quizzes? And all the other students were like, oh my God, thank you. Yes, this quiz is way too short. We're all struggling to finish. But it's the child, now adult, who is raised to think critically and advocate for herself instead of looking at something and saying, well, a grown-up says this is the way it is. I better just go with it even though it doesn't make sense, or even though it seems poorly constructed, or even though there seems to be a flaw here, I better not question. No. Why not question? Why not come back at them and say, hey, have you thought about making this change? I've always taught my kids, what's the worst that's going to happen? They're going to say no. You don't know if you don't ask. But kids who are taught to submit unquestioningly to authority, they never ask. They never develop those communication skills. They never develop those negotiation skills. But also, I would just say that the American evangelical concept of obedience, lots of people in lots of places around the world don't understand that, and they don't teach children that way. They don't parent children that way. They don't run their schools that way. And I'm not a permissive parent. I'm an authoritative parent. I'm just not an authoritarian parent. And it's possible for teachers to be authoritative without being authoritarian. In fact, one of the best examples I ever had of how to interact with children and how to run a classroom full of kids was my daughter's preschool teacher. So many of my good parenting skills I learned from teacher Linda at the Mouse Factory in Newport, Oregon, about how to treat children with dignity and humanity and be curious about what they have to say and about what they're thinking about. Realizing that kids look at things from a different perspective than adults, and they may have fresh eyes on a situation and bring a new perspective, new creativity to play. Teacher Linda was very much authoritative, but not dictatorial. A good teacher's job should be to get the students to cooperate, not to obey. To get kids to be participants in their own education, to get kids to drive their own education. And I realized that the American school system was designed off of the Prussian military model, where the goal is to create compliant, obedient members of the military, but in the US, compliant, obedient cogs in the machine of capitalism, right? Obedient, not critically thinking, follows orders the first time you demand of them, workers on the assembly line. That was really the goal of our educational model initially. And I've talked about that extensively in the past. And unfortunately, our school systems in much of the country are still set up that way. But that doesn't mean that a lot of teachers think that way. There are so many teachers like my spouse who are working within a system that they know needs reforming, but they are also trying to empower their students to run their own educations, to take charge of their own lives, to be empowered learners, not passive recipients. So I would really encourage you to go back and rewatch this video, because nowhere in there did I say that children shouldn't listen to adults. And somewhere along the way, you have conflated instantaneous obedience and evangelical concepts of sinful, willful children with kids listening to adults, having conversations with adults being facilitators of children's education. Those are completely different things. I really encourage you to think beyond this dynamic of adults in charge and children must obey them, and think about the ways that adults and children are people in community with each other, and they can work together. That adults can be facilitators of children's education, that adults can partner with kids and they can learn together, that not everything has to be hierarchical or oppositional. And we have to think about what our end goal is here, right? Do I want subservient, obedient, mindless adults who are cogs in the industrial machine? Or do I want critical thinking, independent human beings who can run their own lives and negotiate for what they want, advocate for themselves, and have functional, healthy relationships with other people?